Welcome to the INDOT Certified Asphalt Lab Technician Program, Chapter 7, Field Testing. I am Jason Galecka, the Assistant Asphalt Engineer for the Indiana Department of Transportation. Sampling HMA. All samples are to be taken by the contractor/producer. INDOT does not take the samples. They are required to witness the taking of these samples. Samples are taken from random locations in accordance with ITM 802. They are determined by random number generators or tables within the ITM. Sampling procedures. There are various types of HMA sampling procedures such as plate samples without a mold, plate samples with a mold, cores, and truck samples. Truck samples include 4.75 millimeter mixtures, open grade mixtures, and dense graded mixtures. Plate samples without a mold is more commonly used in Indiana than plate samples with a mold. Truck samples are optional and are used for informational purposes for the producers. Plate sampling without a mold apparatus. You need a sampling plate which is an 8-inch square minimum with 3 8-inch holes. Number 18's mechanic wire, masonry nail, pitchfork or square bit shovel, boxes for sampling with non-absorbent lining, and oven bags. You are going to use the nail to hold the plate sample in place. The wire is used to find the plate samples, and the shovel is used to lift up the sampling plates. A picture of plate sampling layout. Each sampling plate is 2 foot apart, longitudinal and transverse. The A boxes are the main testing boxes. The B boxes are used to appeal test results from the A boxes. There are also C boxes, which are not in the picture, but the contractors use them to compare to our results to determine if an appeal is allowed. Each box has its own use. The A1 box is the random location selected, which is used for your max and binder content. The A2 box is used for your gyratory pills. A3 box is used for gradation and your GSB testing of the aggregate. Your B1 box is your backup for your A1 box, and your B2 box is the backup for the A2 box. Here is a picture of the minimum sample size required. The first column is for moisture. The second column is for the A1 box or the B1 box for binder content and gradation. The third column is for the A2 box or B2 box for gyratory pills. The fourth column is for the A3 box for gradation and aggregate bulk specific gravity. You want each sample box to weigh at least 11,000 grams.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, I'm Cody Fowler, and I'm a QC manager at Reith Riley Construction. We're now going to go into more detail about each type of random sampling that INDOT has. We'll start now with plate sampling without a mold. This process begins with the inspector using ITM 802 to determine the random tonnage at where the plate sample falls. He then informs you what truck that sample will fall on. It is then the technician's job to let the paving crew know that a plate sample is coming up, so that that area may be properly tacked before the plate samples are put down. At that point, the plate samples are set down in a layout like seen here. If there's any movement, a masonry nail can be used to hold the plates down to keep them from slipping, and then the wires are laid out to the outside of the mat before the paver goes over these samples. As Jason mentioned earlier, each plate is to be laid out 2 feet by 2 feet from center to center. It's not necessary to pull out a tape measure and do this every single time, but it is a good idea to do it your first few times to get a good visual of how it should look going forward. Before putting the plate samples down, most people will spray either a PAM cooking spray or another approved anti-adhesive material. It's just important to make sure that that material doesn't have any solvents or petroleum-based products that could affect the asphalt binder properties of the sample that you're taking. Here's another layout of the plate samples. These are all the QA samples, and then this is the QC sample for the contractor to test. Usually they prefer to take 2 plate sample boxes to make sure they have enough material, so another sample is usually laid up station. This slide just serves a reminder to always stay safe when out there taking samples. It's important to make good eye contact with the operator of the paver and the transfer machine before placing the plates down, and to try to minimize any walking in between these 2 pieces of equipment. Always wear your proper PPE, hard hats and vests are required. This shows the technician using his wire on the uncompacted mat to locate his plate sample. And at this point, a pitchfork or square bit shovel is used to get up under the plate to pick up the plate and mix on top of it while trying to minimize the amount of mix that could roll off of the plate. Each sample is picked up and placed into its respective box. Most experienced technicians will get these boxes labeled and ready and laid out before pulling the plate samples up. This helps to expedite the process and get the paver and rollers back going down the road. It is extremely important to make sure the entire sample from the plate sample goes into the box. This is to make sure that it's a representative sample when being tested. As mentioned earlier, it's very important to make sure you have a sufficient amount of material in each box. All mixes except for open grade, SMA, and 4.75 millimeter mixes need 11,000 grams of material in each box. This is approximately 24 pounds per plate sample box. One of the most important steps of this process comes at the very end. Once you've pulled your sample and placed it in the plate sample boxes, it's then time for you and the crew to refill these holes where the plate samples were. Make sure the correct amount of material is used. If too little or too much material is placed in these holes, this will result in a bump or dip when smoothness is tested. Now we'll quickly discuss plate samples with a mold. This isn't commonly practiced with most Indiana contractors. The reason behind plate sampling with a mold is to try to help limit segregation and make sure material doesn't fall off the plates. As you'll see in the pictures of the next few slides, it's mainly important to have a mold that is smaller than the actual plate samples, but is tall enough to hold the entire mix thickness. The same process is followed when laying out and picking up all the plate samples. At that point, then the mold is pushed in a circular motion into the mix directly over the plate. Then any excess material is scraped off of the plate sample so the only material remains inside the mold. The primary reason this isn't followed anymore by most contractors is that it's very difficult to get a mold big enough to collect the entire 11,000 gram sample that is required. And now we'll continue on with core samples. Each plate sample will be accompanied by 2 core samples. It's important to have a drill bit and a rig that's able to cut a 6-inch core plus or minus a 1/4 inch. Be sure to not damage the core when removing it. Watch out when using a screwdriver or something that's not made to remove the core. It's also very important, do not cut the core while the mat is still hot. This can cause the air voids inside the core to open up and density to drop. If it's a full depth core, once the core is removed, clearly mark the layer that is to be tested. Then take the core and place it in a plastic cylinder with a lid to allow safe transport to the testing facility. Now we'll discuss truck sampling, starting with 4.75 millimeter mixtures. First, you want to visually observe the mixture in the truck for determination of uniformity. Then insert a shovel into various areas that appear uniform in texture and place the mixture into a sample container. Now we'll talk about truck sampling for open graded mixtures. For open grade, you'll insert your shovel between the center of the cone and the front of the truck and place that into a container. Then, as you'll see on the next slide, you'll place it between the center of the cone and the back of the truck, and then that is added to the first sample. And lastly, for your most common type of truck samples, we'll discuss dense graded mixtures. Your sampling location for dense graded material is right in the midsection of the truck. In the next few slides, we'll walk through the process of pulling the material to make sure you have a representative sample. This begins by inserting a shovel horizontally into the mix at the approximate midsection of the truck. Then you lift your shovel vertically to establish a horizontal plane in the mixture. Then you'll insert the shovel vertically to establish a vertical face below the horizontal plane. The sample was then taken by inserting the shovel horizontally into the vertical face at a depth twice the thickness of the max particle size and lifting the material up. A good rule of thumb is go in about the same depth that the paving crew is laying the mat out on the road. That material is then placed in a sample container and taken back to the testing facility. That wraps up all the random sampling testing that NDOT requires. Now we're going to go back to Jason, who's going to discuss plate sample box labeling and the different types of things we use to measure smoothness.
After your plate sample is taken, the box will be labeled with the following information. Your AB sample, which is your box number A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, contract number, DMF number, CLN number, lot and sublot, material description, which includes the size, the course, easel category, and PG binder grade, sample date, and the site manager ID number. Here is an example of the box label. It will include everything I mentioned in the previous slide along with signatures from an NDOT employee and the contractor. Pavement smoothness is part of the 401.18 in the standard spec. Smoothness affects public safety because the vehicles are more controllable, ride quality, and the pavement longevity. You might ask, how does smoothness affect the pavement longevity? It affects the longevity of the pavement because smooth roads have a distributed load, whereas a non-smooth road will have a point load. How do we monitor smoothness? We use one of three ways: a 16 or 10 foot straight edge, profilograph, or inertial profiler, also known as IRI. Here's a picture of a straight edge. Here's a picture of a profilograph. Hopefully sometime in the near future we will get rid of these and go straight to IRI. Here's a picture of an inertial profiler. They can be used on multiple vehicles. Some of them can be mounted on the front or the back of the vehicle. Currently, IRI, International Roughness Index, is still being piloted or tested in the state of Indiana. In 2019, it was piloted on 12 different contracts. In 2020, it was piloted on another 12 contracts. This coming season, 2021, it will be piloted on 14 contracts. Once NDOT feels confident in the spec, IRI will be fully implemented and replace the profilograph. All right, are there any questions?